softly and speak in whispers since the news of Rayyan's kidnapping broke. Nobody wanted to make noise in a house that was bleeding. It was in that quiet that Grace Adeyemi appeared at the doorway of the bedroom. She knocked softly before entering, the way she always did, with a gentleness that was characteristic of everything about her. Grace had been working in our household for 6 years. She was a Nigerian woman in her late 30s, originally from Ibadan, and she had come to Saudi Arabia through a legitimate domestic work agency that our family used for household staff. She was not just any servant, she was the most trusted person in our home after family members. The kind of person you forget is an employee because she carries herself with such quiet dignity and genuine care that she feels like family. Grace set a tray of tea down on the small table near the window and looked at both of us with eyes that held something deeper than sympathy. She had been watching our family fall apart for 3 weeks. She had seen my mother weep. She had watched my father age visibly. She had seen Hissa move through the house like a shadow of herself. And Grace had been doing what we did not know she was doing. She had been praying. Every night in her small staff quarters at the back of the house, Grace Adeyemi had been on her knees praying to her God for Rayyan. She had not said anything about it because she understood her place in our home, and she understood the religious boundaries that existed in a household as deeply Islamic as ours. But that evening, something changed in her. She told us later that she felt a strong push inside her that she could not ignore, like a voice telling her that it was time to speak. She stood near the doorway after setting the tray down, and she said quietly but clearly that she wanted to say something and she hoped we would not be offended. Hissa and I both looked at her. She said she had been praying for Rayyan every night since he was taken. She said she believed in a God who could reach into any situation, no matter how impossible it looked, and bring someone out safely. She said she wanted to ask us, with all the respect she had for our faith and our family, if we would be willing to pray to Jesus of Nazareth for Rayyan's return. The name landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. I felt Hissa stiffen slightly beside me. I felt my own instinct rise up in the way it had been trained to rise up since childhood whenever anything outside of Islam was introduced into a conversation about God. But I did not speak immediately, and neither did Hissa. Something about the way Grace said it, the calm in her voice, the absence of any agenda or aggression, made us both pause. Grace did not wait for us to respond before she continued speaking. She told us about a man named Peter in the Christian New Testament, a man who was thrown into prison by a king who wanted him dead, chained between 2 soldiers with guards at the door. She said that while Peter slept in his chains, the church prayed for him through the night, and an angel of God walked into that prison, woke Peter up, removed his chains, led him past every guard, and walked him out through an iron gate that opened by itself. She then told us about Paul and Silas, 2 men who were beaten and thrown into the deepest cell of a prison in a city called Philippi in Greece, their feet locked in stocks, and who began singing praises to God at midnight until the entire prison shook with an earthquake that broke every chain and opened every door. She said the God who did those things was not a God of the past. She said he was alive, and he was still doing the same things today. I watched Hissa as Grace spoke. I watched my wife's face move through resistance and skepticism and grief and desperation, and finally settle into something I recognized because I was feeling it too. We were drowning, and someone was holding out a hand, And the only question that mattered in that moment was not whether the hand belonged to the right religion. The only question was whether we were willing to reach for it. I spoke first. I told Grace we would like her to pray with us. Hessa nodded beside me without saying a word, but her eyes said everything. Grace asked if we wanted to involve the rest of the family, and I told her honestly that I did not think the rest of the family was ready for this, and that we should start here, just the three of us in Rayhan's bedroom. Grace pulled a small Bible from the pocket of her uniform. It was worn and soft at the edges, the way a book gets when it has been handled with love over many years. She opened it and read a passage aloud in English and then translated it simply into Arabic for us. She read from the Gospel of John, where Jesus said he was the resurrection and the life, and that whoever believed in him would never truly die. Then she read from the book of Psalms, where it said that the Lord was close to the brokenhearted and saved those who were crushed in spirit. She read slowly, giving each word room to breathe, and I felt something happening inside my chest that I did not have a name for at the time. A loosening, like a knot that had been pulled too tight for weeks, was beginning, just barely to release. Then Grace bowed her head and began to pray in the most direct, personal, and fearless way I had ever heard anyone speak to God in my entire life. Grace's prayer that night was unlike anything I had ever witnessed in 40 years of Islamic devotion. She did not recite memorized words from a script. She did not perform. She spoke to Jesus the way a person speaks to someone standing directly in front of them, with urgency and familiarity and absolute confidence that every word was being heard. She called Jesus by name repeatedly. She reminded him, as she put it, of his own promises. She said he was the same God who opened prison doors and broke chains and sent angels into impossible situations, and she was asking him to do it again, right now, for a young man named Rayhan al-Rashidi who was tied and frightened somewhere in Sudan. She asked Jesus to send his angels to that place to break every chain holding our son and to bring him home safely. Hessa was weeping quietly beside me before Grace had spoken 3 sentences, and I was not far behind her. The 2 weeks that followed that prayer were the strangest and most conflicted weeks of my life. On the surface, nothing had changed. Rayhan was still missing. The security firm